Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us about a person I knew who was a very eminent lawyer, both as a barrister and then as a judge for many years. His name was Lord Denning. He will be known to many people of my generation who actually either appeared before him or met him. And for a large number of younger people growing up, studying the law, who will never have met him, but will know his name because of the many judgments he delivered as Master of the Rolls. The book is called Lord Denning, Life and Legacy, and it's been written by James Wilson. And there's a most useful foreword by Lord Neuberger, which I'm sure all of you will find very helpful. The book has been published by Wildy, Simmonds and Hill Publishing, and I'm very grateful to them for doing so because this book is long overdue. Lord Denning wrote his own sort of various books about his life, which surprisingly weren't as interesting when one read them as one would think, because his judgments had that certain eloquence which I'm afraid some of his books lacked. But however, this is a really good book, and I've given it a title, A Formidable Biography for a Formidable Man, and that's exactly what he was. He was also, to many people, a very charming man, but it depended on who you were, probably. Let's have a look at the book. Here it is. It's this one here. It's a hardback. See the front. Lots of wigs on show here. There's the spine. Lord Denning, there you go. And then on the back again, a nice little picture again of him with his full-bottomed wig on. It's a quote from Lord Neuberger. In this excellent book, James Wilson has managed to capture both the man and the judge. He does, and that's exactly right. Let's look at the book itself. The back cover just has some information about the author. Then you've got quite a nice index, which is by page numbering. In fact, the index has quite a lot of detail in it, depending on what you're looking for. You can see the beginning of the index there. You've then got at the back of the book his famous cases, which I thought was really lovely because I actually was part of this over the years and I actually saw him in action in the Court of Appeal. So there's a list of cases, a long time ago. I didn't actually ever appear before him because he was basically, it was after my time in terms of his practice, but certainly he was very well known, and of course I met him on many occasions. The notes, the footnotes are at the back as well, and they actually come with each chapter, so you don't get the footnotes at the end of each chapter, they're right at the back of the book. Now there's some blurb here, and I'm actually using the blurb as part of the review for this book. Then you've got the actual front page there, and there's a very nice dedication. I do not review books, neither does Elizabeth, which we don't like. There's no point, because I actually think that the work that's been put into a book deserves credit. And if in fact we don't like the book, I'm not going to say anything about it, because I don't think it's right to criticise. I've written books, so I don't feel that it's very helpful to be too critical. Lawyers on Denning, very, very useful commentaries all the way through. So he's a formidable man. Then Lord Denning on Lord Denning. Wasn't anyone to hide a light under his bushel, I have to say. But there's some lovely quotes from him. Then there's a foreword about him. A lovely start. Alfred Thomson Denning, Tom Denning, was a truly remarkable, indeed a unique judicial figure. And you don't need to, you know enough by even reading that. That's by David Neuberger. That's his actual foreword. Then you've got a preface as well. And then after the preface, which talks in quite length. The preface was written in October 2022, and I'm recording this in the summer of 2023. Obviously, it's an interesting point, because one of the things I think that comes out of this is there were quite a lot of controversies about Denning, and I think that the book tries to get a balance right. Obviously, it's important. There's various other notes in the book, notes on currency, type of currency that was used, list of the various photographs. I'll show those in a moment. Then the content section itself, you can see the chapter headings all the way through. Obviously my family have a connection with Lord Denning, which I'm not going to talk much about, but I will say that I found him a very helpful man to talk to, and he was a very decent person in my opinion. You can then see how the book is structured, and it centres very much on his role as Master of the Rolls and the various actual judgments he delivered. Then there are some appendices at the back, Denning in the Law Reports, very useful that for law students, societies and other organisations. There are quite a lot of Denning societies at universities, and then there's the bibliography, and then you go straight into the book itself. Chapter 1, beginnings from Whitchurch, which is where we were born, to Oxford, and then beyond. And then, as you can see, the book runs through all the way, and you've got quite a large amount of subheadings as well. Let me just show you the photographs. I've got to be careful because of copyright. There are photographs there, just showing you a couple. You can see him in his Majesty as a judge, and certain family photographs as well. All in all, the book runs to something like 400 pages. I haven't read every single page because I don't need to. What I have done is I've read the overall picture of Denning. What I wanted to do is concentrate on those areas that I was familiar with. But I actually read most of the detail, and what I did like was the huge amount of scholarship that has been shown by James Wilson. There's the book anyway, I'll just pop it over there. Now, what do I say in this short review? Well, I've had to think carefully about what to say about this book because the actual blurb to go with it sums up the man, and I think it's worth quoting from that because, let me say this, Tom Denning was the most famous English judge of the 20th century. That's my opinion, and that's agreed with by a lot of other people. Arguably, he was one of the most famous of any century. That may be taking it a bit far because we don't quite know what might happen in the future. And of course, each time we have a generation of judges, they're all very, very important because all their friends say they are. I don't want to be rude about any of that, but that's exactly how it comes across. Now, what I'm saying here is, of course, that Denning's judgments, whilst they were sometimes heavily criticised from the Court of Appeal when they went up to the House of Lords by certain people who didn't like the way he used legal mechanisms, if I can put it that way, to change particular decisions. And that's what he did, putting it bluntly. That's actually how he got round some things, to give justice, as he saw it, to a number of litigants. Now, I say that because it depends on your point of view. I'm pro-Denning, so therefore I'm going to take a strong stance in his favour. Let me just say that these are quotes. The quotes are that his judgments were legendary for both their style and substance. They're beautifully written, actually. That's an important point. The style was instantly recognisable. You can tell a Denning judgment, believe me, very quickly, because of his short sentences and the unique method of storytelling. Because what he does is he sets the scene when he actually delivers his judgment. Of course, the short sentences are absolutely fundamental in law. And the substance was always less about law and more about justice. And I think that's the key to how we see Denning now in the 21st century, because he looked for the fairest outcome in every case before him. And the joke used to be, if you were a little old lady turning up before him, you were likely to get a very good hearing. And I'm thinking of that because I did actually see Galley versus Lee in the Court of Appeal, and I understood to a certain extent what people were talking about. Well, that's rather a long time ago. Over time, of course, what the author is saying here is that the approach that Denning had on justice and what he's described as his manipulation of precedent, bearing in mind his Court of Appeal, so therefore he was bound by the House of Lords when he felt like it. There was always a substantial discussion about whether the doctrine of stare decisis applied to him or not. The point I would make, obviously it led to him becoming an increasingly controversial figure. And of course the problem that we had throughout Denning's career is that society changed around him. And the view put forward in this book, which I think is right, is that he adhered rigidly to the Edwardian morality of his childhood. Bearing in mind he was born in the Victorian era, grew up in the Edwardian society. That, for those of you who may not quite follow this, is during the period of Edward VII, from 1901 to 1910. And of course his general approach, because he produced the report on the Profumo affair, which was a sensational scandal in post-war Britain, and was dismissed by some as a whitewash by the establishment. Of course, that depends on your point of view. There were a lot of people who could see some of the problems. Private Eye used to take the mickey out of him quite regularly. But the fact is that he produced what he thought was a fair report. Now, again, let's look at his judicial role. The rulings on trade union disputes earned him a lot of trouble with what we would now call far left, the trade union movement, who did not like him. And his dismissal of the appeal in the Birmingham 6 case, where they were falsely convicted of terrorist atrocities, became really quite a notorious viewpoint, because it was a gross miscarriage of justice. And of course, whilst he did maintain his position on that, there was a lot of goodwill to help keep his reputation intact. And obviously after his death, he was described as the best known and best loved judge in the whole of our history by the then Lord Chief Justice, Lord Bingham. And that's quite a substantial tag, if you like to put, but in my view thoroughly deserved. Now, for all his controversies then, where do we see Denning as the man? Because there's no question that Tom Denning led an extraordinary life. He was born into a family of modest means in a small Hampshire town in 1899, and he went on to gain 2 firsts at Oxford from Magdalen, and he was commissioned in the First World War, and he was one of the last people to die, actually, who was a survivor of World War One. The World War that he fought was not quite the same as the others. The trench warfare side was not something that he actually experienced in great detail at all, because of the nature of his age and what he was doing. But he certainly had a very substantial understanding, and he came from a background of that period, which, if you've ever met people, as I have met many people, relatives and so forth, from World War One, obviously all gone now, you will know that there was a particular approach which had changed by the time you got to the those who fought in World War Two. Of course, Denning was too old for that, and they've again had a slightly different approach. And of course, I've been in the army myself, so I am bound to have perhaps a slightly different approach in terms of the military way in which things are done. Obviously, what he then did, having finished his commission duties in World War One at the end of the war, he then became a successful barrister, and he actually served for over 40 years as a judge. Now, I think this is a superb biography. It's a remarkable life story, and I think the assessment of Denning's legacy from the time of his death and how we are now looking at him shows that he continues to influence people, he continues to inspire people and occasionally infuriate. That's mainly, of course, academics, and I would accept that because we all know who he hates. I can remember some heated discussions at Cambridge about him, and I can also remember some heated discussions amongst some of the judiciary. But that is the way it is in our society. And there are some rather good quotes. As I say, there was the splendid one at the back from Lord Neuberger, and then there's another one which the Law Society Gazette put forward. Now remember, Master of the Rolls, he's actually Master of the Rolls of Solicitors, so of course they will have their own input. And there's an interesting quote here. It says, "The book is easy to read, full of interesting information and very well produced. It's a readable, honest and accurate portrait of the man and some of his most interesting and significant judgments." Now, my final point on that is read the book, because I think this book is first class for students, apart from anything else, and I'll tell you why. Because when you go to the back of the book, you've actually got the cases, and the case law itself is really very important, because when you are a student and you are thinking of the work, the actual decision making that Denning actually took part in, you can see that he was a formidable man. Now, the list of cases starts on, I'm not quite sure, on page 387, and it's got a whole list of the really important decisions, many of which are considered to be controversial, but my view is that you'll all have your own favourites. I have a number of very interesting favourites, which actually are mentioned here. I mean, one of the ones, the Gillick case, that is one that is well worth thinking about, because I still believe there's a lot of current jurisprudence in that decision, and I think it's important to remember that Denning is one of those people who was, I think, very much before his time. It's a lovely book, and I'm so pleased I've got it. I'd like to thank Wildy very much for producing this work. Obviously, Wildy's are based in Lincoln's Inn, and Denning was a member of Lincoln's Inn, as I am, and I was, as I say, very, very privileged to meet him, and I always will have very fond memories of him. And this book has, if anything, strengthened my views of what a splendid guy he actually was. We all differ on views about him, so I can tell you that. Now, there were one or two things I didn't agree with, but generally speaking, he was a great figure within the legal world. Thank you to everybody involved. Most grateful to have this book. Bye-bye.